ABV is proudly sponsored by Convoy, Bintani, Craft Punks Canning and Rallings, labels and stickers.
Is it hard to play favourites? Like, there'd obviously be some breweries that you prefer and like personally.
Yeah.
And is it hard to sort of like not continually go to them if people want to say, oh, I want to go and check this out? Like, do you persuade them one way or the other?
Sometimes. Absolutely, sometimes. It also depends on how far we want to drive. That sounds really cheeky, but if we're picking somebody up, like on the Gold Coast, if we're picking them up in Helensville on the northern end, driving all the way to Currumbin, as much as we love Smoky and want to showcase Currumbin Valley, you're like, oh, that's a long time in the car.
Yeah.
So we kind of base our tours where people do get picked up, at least on the Gold Coast.
Well, they want value for money too, right? They don't want to always be in a car just driving around.
No, exactly.
They want to see breweries have some beers. So.
And sometimes people do request that because they go, oh, I never want to drive to Currumbin, so I'll let somebody else do it. And we do take into account if people have expressed preferences of where they want to visit.
Yep.
But if there are people who don't really care, we kind of do tend to showcase our favorites.
Yep.
But it's also a matter of, I always say, I wouldn't serve somebody beer that I wouldn't drink.
Yep.
And so if I know, like I said, if there's a special beer or if there's just something that is absolutely exceptional, we'll make an effort to showcase that, because I think...
You want to show it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also think one of the kind of issues, at least in early days of craft beer or micro breweries or whatever you want to call them, was inconsistency.
Yep.
And so a lot of people would have tried a beer from one of the early breweries, say, and whether it was from the tap or whether it was, they got it at a bottle shop, but people might have been disappointed with that experience. Or they go in one time and it's great. They go in and visit the next time and it's not as good.
Yep.
So that quality and that consistency was an element that took a long time to develop within the industry. And so I think it turned a lot of people off.
Yep.
And so what we want to do is really get people to experience the best of the best, to be able to understand what is out there, and that it's not all this kind of same average beer.
Yep.
And showcase the different flavors, that there are amber ales and there are dark beers and there are different kinds of lagers and pilsners, and just give them a wide range.
Yeah. Is it just breweries, or do you do distilleries and cideries and wineries? Or does any of that ever come into it?
Definitely no wine.
Yep.
We are not big wine drinkers, and the reason we can make brewery tours work is we are passionate about beer.
Yep.
Distilleries, yes. So a couple years ago, just post-COVID, we actually incorporated our distillery tours because we've seen the explosion of gin distilleries and rum distilleries. So we visit...
And a lot of the time, because of the artisan licence in Queensland, they work hand in hand, don't they?
Absolutely.
Like some of the breweries have distillery products and vice versa.
Well, if you look at somewhere like Milton Common up in Brisbane, they distill their own gin and vodka and whiskey. White Lies does the same thing. Fick has their own distillery license. So there are quite a few of those. So yeah, we absolutely incorporate those. Capricorn, Wildflower, Grandad Jack's, the distilleries up in Brisbane as well. Which is great when you get people who are a bit mixed.
Yep.
You get, I don't really drink beer, but they want to do something. And we can also incorporate those at the end of a brewery tour. So we do sometimes do, say, 2 breweries, 2 distilleries, so that people don't get really full. Because that's always the biggest complaint. I don't drink a lot of beer, I get really bloated. And you're like, let's end the day with a G&T. And that's always really nice. And you can see how they marry together.
Yep.
So even on our distillery tours, we do talk about beer and about brewing, because most spirits start their life as beer, really. And so you can give people this education of the mashing process and all that, and then go, okay, and then there's this additional step of distilling.
Yeah.
So, so that's been pretty successful. It didn't catch on quite as much as I thought it would, to be totally honest. I thought that we'd be a lot busier with our distillery tours, and I don't know if it's price point or people are just unaware that those tours exist.
Yeah.
Everybody knows wine tours are a thing.
Yeah.
It's taken a lot longer for people to realize, even now, after almost 9 years, that even brewery tours exist. So, distillery tours is still on the up.
Yeah. How do you reach a lot of your target audience? Is it just through word of mouth, or are you doing paid ads and that sort of stuff? Because it's not like we're driving around now and people might see the van.
Yeah.
But some might just think it's a Gold Coast tourist thing, and they can just hop on and hop off.
Yeah. Thankfully, nobody's tried to do that. Although at the end of the day, sometimes people will hail us as a taxi, be like, "Oh, mate, where are you going? Can we get on board?" You're like, "No, it doesn't really work like that. Sorry." We have tried a lot of different advertising and have not had almost any success with it. So we've done radio advertising, which we enjoyed and probably saw the best return on investment with them. We've tried ads in Qantas magazines. We've advertised in the GC 500 magazines. We've done paid ads on Facebook and on Google, and we just get almost no response from it. It's really, really interesting. So a lot of what we do is, word of mouth. People seeing the van, that's actually one of the options when we say, "How have you found us?" Like, "Oh, you know, I live across the street from Green Beacon and I see your van there all the time and I finally booked it." And you're like, "Yeah, rad." And then just, we've got pretty decent SEO. So when people do search, we do come up, as long as we're not being overtaken by paid ads from third-party providers, which don't get me started on them. But so we've tried a lot, and I think we're fortunate now that there is a bit of momentum behind it, so we do get that word of mouth. We also get a lot of repeat guests. Which is really...
Well, that's encouraging.
It is.
Really
it
gratifying.
Absolutely is, yeah. There's no better feeling, really, than when you've taken somebody out and they come back a year later or 2 years later or 5 years later, or every year. We've had some people who come and celebrate their birthday with us every single year. And you're like, that is an amazing feeling that they trust us and they're willing to pay the money again for us to go out and do this. They've heard the spiel. They know most people don't remember it because they've had enough to drink by the end that they're not reciting it along, but
you're part of their reputation and their tradition now.
Exactly. And we love that. So having that kind of word of mouth is, like, you can't pay for that.
Do you find, like, people, like, do people treat it as, "Oh, I'm just going out, I've got a designated driver," and they're just getting too much, and you've got to say to them, "Guys, you need to slow down a tad"? Like, how much sort of do you have to look after the patrons in that regard?
We do all of the looking after. So we always say at the beginning, so whether somebody's making an inquiry with us for a Bucks party or just at the beginning of the tour, we pretty much have a couple rules. So one is no drinking on board. So nobody can have any roadies while we're cruising around. And the other thing is we don't encourage people to buy extra drinks to drink on site. So we always encourage takeaways, 100%. But in terms of having an extra pod, an extra schooner, you just don't need it. You get between 4 and 6 tasters everywhere we go. And those tasters add up. I always say that they're small but mighty, right? They do add up rather quickly, even if you think you're an experienced drinker. And so you don't need those filler drinks. You don't need to buy, I don't know, people have tried buying tequila shots or Jack Daniels or whatever, because by the end of the day, you've had somewhere between 3 and 4 liters of beer. And food and all of that kind of stuff. So nobody really gets too messy. We're pretty strict on that. Like, there are always occasions where people slip past you and get to the bar. But the other thing is, we've been working with these venues for so long that most of the staff behind the bar as well, they know not to serve our groups extra. And they'll even kind of flag me if they see somebody up there, somebody wants to buy X. And then they go, "Should I serve them?" And it's always up to us, really, but we generally discourage the additional purchases.
Do you have, have you ever had any instance where, like, there's breweries that have said, "Just don't come back to us, it's just too painful"? No, really, really lucky in that sense. We really value the relationships that we have with the venues. And that's something that we're really protective of, is making sure that we keep that reputation intact. Because then when other breweries do open, people can say, "Oh yeah, we actually do recommend you get Hop On Brewery Tours in there," as opposed to going, "Steer clear of those guys because they're pretty dodgy." So if we ever get a group that is not interested or being disrespectful in any way, that's it. We will absolutely call the tour early. It's happened very rarely, but we'd rather
call up a brewery and cancel our booking of 10 people and say, look, sorry, we're not coming in, than bring in a bunch of yahoos that are just going to be disruptive and rude and
just ruin the venue.
And ruin the venue and just not care.
Yeah.
Like, I guess that's the thing as well, why we kind of put out this, our T's and C's, I guess, when somebody does request a booking, if they're looking after something private, is we want to make sure that we're getting people on tour that are interested in the education.
Yep.
And sometimes they don't know that. Sometimes, again, we get people who've booked through third party and we sit them down to do the education, to talk through the ingredients, and they go, oh, I didn't know I was going to learn something. And they might be a bit snarky about it at first sometimes, like, oh, I have to listen. But then always at the end of the day, they go, mate, that was excellent.
Yeah.
Like, I had no idea what to expect. And oftentimes they say that what we've offered has exceeded their expectations. And that's, again, a great feeling.
That's exactly what you want, right?
That's what you want. And it allows them to do something different before, especially with bucks parties, birthday parties, than just like sitting at the pub and putting a tab on.
How much have you learned about beer and breweries?
Oh my God, so much. We were so green when we started. I actually wish I could put the call out to anybody who traveled with us in the first 6 months of operation.
Come back.
Please come back. Please give us another chance.
I said some stuff that I found out is not true.
Not true, or just, it's so superficial, right? Like, and it's the stuff that you can read in any book, and that's fine. But when we first started, one of our core breweries was Newstead. We used to start pretty much all of our brewery tours in Brisbane at Newstead when it was on Doggett Street. And we ran quite a few tours midweek. And so there was usually a brewer on site, and they would do the walkthrough. So we often do the walkthrough now when we're with our guests, if there's nobody on site to be able to do it. And Matt and I are both very competent in going through the process.
Yep.
But at the beginning, we would leave it over to them. And the amount that we learned, even in the first probably 2-3 months, just listening to these brewers explain the process.
Yep.
And then the more they learned, the more they'd incorporate into the chat, and then we'd pick up on that. And so I've got notebooks full of little notes about things like popcorn lung and, you know, just random things that come up. And you're like, why? It's so much stuff that you would never think to learn.
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know,
That's
right?
And if
so
you're doing something every day as well, you don't think, why would anyone need to know this?
Exactly. And then they have learned about it through, I don't know, reading or through chatting with another brewery. So we've learned a lot. And then on top of that, wanting to learn. So podcasts and books and magazines and articles, you know, in the newspaper, just all of that kind of stuff really adds on. And then somebody will say something and you go, I don't know what that means. And what I love about the industry as well is people don't talk to you like you're an idiot.
They're happy to share info.
They're so happy to share info. And if you ask what you feel like is a silly question, they don't go, oh, that's a dumb question. They'll actually talk you through it. And there are some people absolutely who I would depend on with any of those questions. So people like Hendo, Charlie Hodgson, Jarrett Bravo, Govs, they're absolutely people that if I get stuck on something, I don't feel like they're going to ridicule me for asking a question. Even after doing this for 9 years, I know that I can pick up the phone and go, I do not understand this. And they will talk me through it in language that I can understand.
Yeah. Well,
explain it to me like I'm in kindergarten.
Overall, it's better for us if you know stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, that's it. It can only help the industry.
Yeah, exactly.
And then obviously doing things like awards has been really helpful because just learning about the judging process and sitting in and chatting with people like Chris Sheehan and Anthony Clem.
Oh yeah, I'm going to ask you more of those questions.
Yeah, I'm sure. But listening to them and learning and doing the sensory training with like the guys from Lalamund, like it's just, there's so much. And then that's what inspires you to Google this. And you're like, oh, what about, it's just never ending.
Yeah.
So yeah. Gavin Croft, he's another person that he just knows so much. So you get Crofty talking and you're like, whoa, you have more knowledge in your brain than I will ever know about yeast and about wild ferment.
His recent holiday overseas was just a masterclass
so
in information, wasn't it? It was so good.
I was wrapped, and he's not a big talker, Crofty. No. So all of this information in post form.
He's supposed to have been on this podcast before, and we just haven't had a chance to line up schedules, and we're definitely going to get him. And every time he posts something new, I'm like, oh man.
Ask him about that.
What have you found the biggest struggle running a tour company? Is it getting people to book? Is that the hardest?
That's the hardest part. Yeah. Especially post-COVID. So up until the pandemic, we were on a really good trajectory. Directly after the pandemic, I will say there was quite a lot of support from the government. I always say whether or not you agree with the government, and you know, we won't get into all the politics of it, but they did a lot
different for an American.
We won't get started on that, not today especially. There was so much encouragement and incentive to explore your own backyard, right? They were giving away $100 vouchers or discounted tours, and that we did see an increase in that. We did see a spike in people who were jumping on because why not? It was only $25 or because of this. But the impact that international tourism had, and even national tourism, because WA was so isolated and it took them a long time to kind of start traveling again. We did see an impact, particularly with midweek bookings. Just getting people to book, to spend the money, to realize that it is a value for money. What they're getting, they get a lot of beer, they get the education, they get the behind the scenes. It's a challenge, particularly in this economy as well. And again, we do have a lot of repeat guests, like I said, but it's not something like every year you're going to do it. Yeah, it's not one of those repeat kind of activities. It's not. I don't know. It's a bit different like that. So getting new guests is always a little bit of a challenge, but I think that's probably the same in most hospitality businesses. Is just figuring out your reach, I guess. And because we want everybody, and that's what people always say, oh, you need to be more specific with your demographic. And I go, well, but we want everybody. We want everybody.
You've dragged everyone through my door at various ages, and sometimes it's a father and son and everything, and
husband
they're all
and
having
wife
great times.
And all of that. But it's also, we want everybody, from the people who think that, you know, mass-produced lager is the best thing on the planet to home brewers who are asking you specific questions about saison yeast and fermentation temperatures. So it's hard to be more specific. Like, we've always cast a wide net because those are the people that we want. We want to change people's perception of beer. That's our whole motto. Is teaching them that there's so much out there, that if you like coffee, if you like chocolate, if you like rosé, that there's going to be a beer style that's out there for you.
100%. Now, you and Matt are avid travellers. In fact, in a couple of months, well, actually, when this comes out, it'll probably be a month away.
Can't wait.
You're going away for a huge holiday.
Yes.
Do you struggle to turn off? Because you'll obviously go away and you'll go on tours, and half the time you'll be, I'm sure, going, oh, that's a good thing to do. Like, pick things up, or you... So can you switch off and just enjoy it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons I've never actually gone into beer judging, or I looked at doing my Cicerone and decided not to, because I do want to be able to turn it off. I want to be able to just sit and enjoy a beer, and even if everybody else says it's rubbish and I like it, I want to be able to drink it and not feel guilty about it, and not feel like I'm somehow letting down the wider beer community. I don't know. The biggest eye-opener was about a year after we started. I went back to the States, and I went back to Portland, and there was a really well-established beer tour company there. And so my uncle and I actually did the brewery tour, and it was good. I did come back saying we actually do better, I thought, in terms of the information that we provide and the experience. But there were a few different tips that I learned from doing that I kind of came back to Matt, and I was like, look, you know, we can start incorporating this and that. And, one of the biggest things was the 3-sip rule, is to try every beer at least 3 times before you say no. And that's one of our fundamentals now, is people often take one little mouthful and go, oh, I don't like it. And you go, but you don't like coffee after you've just brushed your teeth either, but that's not coffee's fault, is it? So that was one of those things that I think changed kind of how we ran the tours. But no, we can turn off. And we don't make our holidays all about beer. There's absolutely some beer tourism involved, but we just walk, you know, and if we're in Singapore, we're drinking Tiger.
Yep.
And if we're in some other place, we recently went to South Korea, and you just drink whatever their stock standard lager is on tap, usually because you've been walking all day and you couldn't really care at that point in time.
It's wet, it's cold.
It's wet, it's cold, and I'm drinking it with fried chicken, and that's all you want. So, we'd spend a lot more money and a lot more hungover days if we drank too much beer on tour.
Thank you for driving us around before.
Like I said, thanks for the invite.
No worries.
It's bloody good, isn't it?
Oh, it's excellent. Yeah. I love a black IPA, and it's like garlic bread. If garlic bread's on the menu, I order it.
Yep.
If black IPA's on the menu, I order it as well.
Absolutely. And every time, we've got a fridge full of beer right now, and almost every time we come here with a group, we end up taking a squealer.
Yeah.
Matt will have to specifically say, don't buy any beer on tour. And I'm like, well,
you
weren't drink it, and it's delicious. So, and they know that we love it too. So there was another beer on top that they had to finish before they put the black IPA on. And then every time we'd come in, is it on yet? No, not yet. We've got
we'll tell our
20
tour
more
group.
liters to finish. We're like, right, we'll drink all of that. We want that one on tap.
Thanks so much. Again, I know I've said it, but yeah, thanks so much for having us and driving us around. It's fantastic. I'm going to book a tour. I've got to plan the thing that I'm going to do.
Plan a thing. That's very specific. I like it.
Yeah. I'm about specifics.
Yeah. No, honestly, it is very cool that you reached out to us. It's always fun to get a chat with, obviously with you guys, but just in general, just telling the world about what we do. Although I think most people that listen to the podcast probably already know who we are, so, you know.
There's only 6 people that watch our stuff. It's pretty small.
Not even Boston
Brewers,
it's a narrow 12.
niche. It's a narrow niche.
I'm sure that's not the case.
No, we get a few that watch it. What's been your experience about, like, driving around and then at the end of the day, like, are you burnt out from beer? Like, do you go home, man, I need a beer just to chill out?
It kind of depends on the day. I think it's probably like a cook, right? Like, sometimes you finish a day and you're inspired and you're like, I'm going to go home and make myself a feast and I'm going to do this. My best friend used to do that back at home. It'd be 2 o'clock in the morning and we'd been out drinking and she would make a pizza from scratch.
Yeah.
And I'm like, can we really not just go to Macca's? Like, is that not an easier option? Sometimes I go home and I'll be like, yeah, absolutely, let's get into it. If I don't have to work the next day, especially, and kind of work my way through the rainbow of beer. Other times, all the drive home, I'm like, can't wait for beer. And then I get home and I'm like, I really cannot be bothered right now. And in terms of being like burnt out, also energy-wise, like sometimes you have tours. I'm very much an extrovert. I'm not sure if you've cottoned on to that.
I hadn't figured it out. No.
And so I get that energy. It's like a theater performance.
Yes.
If you have an audience that's giving you back that energy, if you have a group that's into it and asking questions and wants to know more and wants to ask questions of the brewer, you finish a 6-hour tour and you're just buzzing. You're on top of the world. You've got all this adrenaline, all this energy. It's challenging when people are less confident and less chatty. So when you get people on board that are
you've got to work at it.
You have to work, and by the time you've gone through all of your stories and you've talked about gabs and you've talked about the history of brewing and you've talked about women in beer and you've just run through everything, that's when you get done and you're like, oh my God, I just want to go to bed when I get home. And it's one of the reasons actually we did stop doing 2-person tours. We used to offer our tours for 2 people.
Yeah.
And it just got to the point where 99% of the people you get on are enthusiastic, are keen to learn, but you do get those people that are they're just naturally quiet people, and it was like pulling teeth sometimes, and you just go, I can't do that anymore. It's just too much. But no, there are definitely times I go home and I'm like, you know what? I just want gin and tonic.
Yeah.
I don't want to bother with anything else.
Because there's been no mingle stuff that you can,
Nah, just plain and simple. Don't want a beer. Don't want to dive right into our Russian Imperial stouts that we have in the fridge. Just gonna have a gin and tonic.
As like a lot of us in hospitality and stuff like that, like I run the bar at Hiker and whatnot.
That's where I know you're from.
100%. You can miss a lot of events too, right? Like you can get to go to them and you see them, and I know you're notorious for it, and I am as well. I get interested on like a bunch of beer events that I see, and I know they're all coming up. To learn how are these people running events? What can I pull from that? B, also, there might, never know what happens, and you might end up with an early night or something, or a day off, and you're like, maybe I can get there. How hard is that? To be so entrenched in the industry and then miss something, especially like cool things that are like big, like Bermuda or Tour de North or
Armageddon,
or
Crafted.
all the breweries' birthday events when they're holding them. And
happens all the time, and it sucks because that's what got us into beer. Was going to these beer festivals and going to these events, and that's where we met people, and people from breweries that don't exist anymore, and all of that kind of stuff. Going to Geelong and going to everything, Gabs and so now we see them and we're like, oh, well, it's on a Saturday. And Saturdays are our busiest day for running tours. And so we do have a couple casual drivers, but then you feel guilty like pawning it off to them just because we want to go to a festival. But yeah, it's hard. I hit interested because we've got an events page.
Yeah.
And so to keep that updated, that's why I do hit interested, even though I'm like, I won't be here.
Everyone's always like, oh, just stick that.
Yeah. Because it goes onto our events page. Bookmark our events page about all the events, because it can be hard to manage all of it. And even yesterday, I finished my tour and I was looking and I was like, oh, it's Netherworld's birthday. And then I was like, oh, no, I'm going home. I really wanted to, and I really wanted to go support them and say happy birthday and see Tim and people like that. But I just
you can't fit everything in.
I can't fit everything in. And after a tour, it's hard, especially because I know that I'd want to have a few drinks and I can't drive home. So, but yeah, it's a killer. Every time we see those events come up, Geelong Beer Festival was this past weekend, and that was one of the things that got us into it. We used to go every year, and haven't been in 6 or 7 years now. Bendigo on the Hop is one that we always make an effort to get to.
Yeah. Why did you set up Hop On up here and not down where you obviously have so many roots and family? Like, you guys go to Tassie often.
Yeah.
You guys are doing a lot there.
Yeah.
Even Daniel, like our head brewer's down there at the moment, and you guys jumped in. No, go here, go here. Here's a link. Just do this.
Just do this. This is everything you need. So initially we wanted to, and actually we had spoken to a lot of people in the beer industry down in Tasmania before we actually launched this up here. I think there must have been a festival 2 months after we kind of started it, and we were talking to them about what we wanted to do. It really comes down to the fact that Matt's daughter was on the Gold Coast when we started it, so we didn't want to go further away from her. So unfortunately,
family first.
Unfortunately, about 3 months after we ran our first tour, they actually moved to Toowoomba.
Oh no!
And so we were a bit like, oh, well, if we'd known that, maybe we would have gone to Tasmania. It might have been a different story. It could have changed the whole face of everything, really, for us. But yeah, it was simply geography. His daughter was here. We stayed close to her. They're back in Brisbane now. So where we are located on the Gold Coast is actually perfect, because we're kind of equidistant from the southern Gold Coast to Brisbane. And so we've talked about moving, and it's still on the back burner. So we've talked about it for a few years now, going down and starting in Tassie. There are a couple slightly different offerings down there in terms of brewery tours, but not quite what we do.
Not a Hop On Brewery Tour experience. Not a Hop On Brewery
Tour, and again, fortunate that we know so many people in the industry down there that I think that we'd get that support. It's just a matter of getting it running with other people here, right? Like getting some staff on that we know that can manage all of that, and finally making the plunge and moving down to Tassie. But it's there. We chat about it. And then from Tassie, Adelaide's been on the back burner for a while now, and I remember I talked to Dan Osper about it and a few people. Someday it will happen, just because there's so much potential in Adelaide. And we were actually looking into it this year before we planned our trip away, of kind of starting for a short period, going down for Fringe, and getting into like Easter holidays and gather around for AFL when there's a lot of buzz around Adelaide. And it just coincided with us going away. So maybe this time next year we'll do something short term there and see if it's something that can become more of a long-term prospect to run in Adelaide.
We were talking off camera. We're not always on.
I reckon you're always on, but anyway.
I just never shut up. Speaking of judging, you haven't judged, as you said. You were head steward multiple times at the Royal Queensland Beer Awards and the Indies. Stewarding is its own incredible and amazing thing, and head steward is insane. There's no way I would even try and attempt that. We always used to laugh when we were out the other side and we're judging beers, and we're all like, oh, Joss is going off. It doesn't matter. You can still hear you on the other side. Sound carries over for sure.
Yeah, it does.
What are you doing? No, put that there. Don't.
I'm trying to get better to not micromanage.
That's hilarious. But how did you get into that? Like, I know you said you didn't want to judge.
Yeah.
But stewarding is not judging.
No.
Why stewarding?
We started, Matt and I volunteered for when it was the CBIA back in probably 2016, 2017. So we were really green. We'd really just started. We kind of knew a few people, but they didn't really know us. I'm trying to think, it was September, so we might not have even started running tours. Anyway, I can't quite remember. But I remember going out to where the beers were stored and helping sort. And this is out like Eagle Farm area. There was a storage place out there. And so we went and sat in the cold and we're sorting all that and stewarding. And it was hot because it was outside, not where the Royal Queensland is now. It was it was awful. It was so sticky and gross. And just as a way to really get into the industry a little bit more, to build those networking connections. And I really enjoyed it. And so we did it the next year. And by that time we were a bit more established. And I still remember, again, people remember me. Matt always says it's because of the accent, so they know the noisy American girl. And I still remember we were serving just as regular stewards, but people knew my name, so if they needed anything, like I still remember Scott Hargrave from Balter. He was like, Joslyn, we need this. And like Brendan Fielding was like, Joslyn, we need this. And I was like, again, like, oh my God, these bigwigs actually know my name. And so I feel like I was a really good steward, and I don't say that to toot my own horn, but I am meticulous with details, and I would always make sure people had water and people had that. And because of that, I think it did put me a little bit at the forefront of this being able to like organize, and people would come to me going, oh, this is the issue, or I have a question about this. And if I don't know the answer, I'm not afraid to ask somebody who does know the answer. So I kind of worked as that really good intermediary and almost became a chief steward without the title. And I don't even remember if there was a chief steward at those early ones. There was like the organizer, but and then I just kind of kept doing Royal Queensland. And the Royal Queensland that we had just post-lockdown, Pete Mitchum was supposed to come up because he was the head steward, chief steward. And we'd worked together like the year before. And so I kind of was a bit learning off of him. And the idea is I was going to be 2IC to him to be able to kind of take over that chief stewarding role. Because I was offered the option. Do you want to go into judging? Like you've been stewarding for a while, you can kind of go into AJ. Or you can be 2IC. And I was like, well, like I said before, I didn't want to get to a point where I was constantly judging it. And so, and I like being bossy. And I'm good at it. And so I was like, no, I'll stay as a steward. And then Victoria had a lockdown, and he actually wasn't allowed to leave to come up to Royal Queensland. And so about 2 weeks before, I got tapped on the shoulder and was like, oh, hey, you're in charge.
This
and
is
I was
your
like,
job now.
wait, what? And I think he gave me a few handwritten notes of like, keep an eye on this. And I was like, okay. And then that just stuck. And then I just kind of rolled into being on the committee for Royal Queensland as well. And then that actually led to the Indies. So Indies post-COVID, each state did their own kind of Indies judging and everything. And when it was finally back open, it was in Queensland because we were the most open state. And they just looked around and were looking for somebody on site because it was being held here, and apparently got the recommendation from Steph Yoon, who ran Royal Queensland at the time, and she put my name into the hat, and that's how it became that. So I did the Indies for 4 years.
The like the awards and being a steward and all that sort of stuff, do you get starstruck meeting some brewers who you know? Because you would know more people in the industry than some other people quite intimately, like dropping into venues and talking to people. Are there some brewers that you like go, I haven't spoken to them? Like, is there?
Well, that one that I just mentioned, that was one, and the fact that they knew who I was, that was probably one of the biggest ones. I mean, not anymore. I used to, and he knows this, I used to be a bit scared of Brendan Fielding because he can be quite intimidating when he's serious. And for a bit, I was a bit intimidated by him, and we kind of broke the ice. And now I am not. Like, they won some great awards the other day. I sent him a text, and I just said, "Hey, congratulations!" And you know, there's not that fear factor anymore. And I think because we met some really big names early on, and maybe didn't realize quite how big they were. So like Will Tatchell from Van Diemen's.
He's a legend. I love him.
Absolute legend. Like, and very much a mentor for us in this. Like, he is absolutely the person who changed Matt's idea of what beer could be. When we met him at a festival, maybe the Tassie connection, footy connection, I don't know, but like that was never a big. We didn't know who he was, and so it's kind of like, oh, you know, we get to meet these guys, and we met the guys from like T-Bone and Last Rites and Shambles and all of this, and then you start reading, and like we met Scotty when Balter opened. And didn't realize kind of his pedigree. And then all of a sudden they start winning all these awards and are in Beer and Brewer and all this, and you're like, I have their phone number. You know what I mean? Like, that's really crazy.
I consider him a mate.
And so no, I try not to get starstruck anymore. Every once in a while I'll be like, oh, that's that person. But I usually...
Because sometimes it's putting a face to a name.
That's exactly it. You go, I've read... so Claire Clouding from WA. I'd heard her name a million times on podcasts like Radio Brews News and just all of those kind of things. And met her through the indies. Didn't think she'd remember me because it's just me. But the first time I met her, I was like, oh my God, face to a name. Like, this is really cool. And we sat and chatted for ages. And Pia as well from WA when they were with the indies. And what was crazy is about a year ago now, Matt's auntie and uncle were hiking the Camino in Spain. And I get this random message from Claire, from Matt's aunt saying, hey, do you know somebody called Claire who works in the beer industry in WA? Because we're hiking with her auntie and uncle. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And then I saw Claire like a couple weeks later in Perth, and she was like, oh my God, our aunties and uncles met. And I was like, I know, how random. And she's like, we have to get a selfie and we have to send it to him. And so that was one of those instances where I'm like, again, Claire is a really big name. She's done lots of podcasts. She's brilliant. And you go, oh, like, we're having a selfie. Like, this is fantastic. But again, it's that kind of imposter syndrome. There still is this feeling where I'm like, oh, nobody will remember who I am or what we do. But yeah, that's off topic. But starstruck, no, not so much anymore. I'm trying to think if there'd be anybody, but I feel like some of the biggest breweries, like we know Mick Cameron from Pirate Life, like, and I feel like that's one of those kind of upper echelon people that, you know, I've got his phone number, like, that I feel like once you kind of hit these big tiers that you're kind of like, nobody can scare me now.
No, they're just people.
They're just people, right? Who have a love of beer.
That's right.